Hello there, you night wanderer, you seeker of forgotten stories. I can picture you right now. Maybe you're wrapped in a soft blanket, tea cooling beside you, while outside your window the world settles into that particular quiet that only comes after midnight. Or perhaps you're driving through empty highways, my voice a companion in the darkness between towns whose names you'll never remember. Wherever you are, I'm grateful you found your way here to this small corner of the internet, where we collect dust-covered stories that history books somehow forgot to mention. Tonight I want to tell you about something so ordinary, so mundane, that even calling it a revolution feels almost laughable. But stick with me, because sometimes the most extraordinary changes happen in the most ordinary places, like a high school cafeteria in a small Indiana town, where 5 women in hairnets discovered they had the power to reshape an entire community, one lunch tray at a time. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment and tell me, are you in a bustling city where the lights never quite go out? Or somewhere so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat? These stories somehow feel different depending on where we receive them, don't they? Our story takes place in Willow Creek, Indiana. Population 8,427, according to the faded sign at the town limits. The year is 1987, and if you've ever driven through the American Midwest, you know this town. It's the place where cornfields stretch to the horizon like green oceans, where Friday night football games are community events, where everybody knows everybody else's business, whether they want to or not. At the heart of Willow Creek sat the high school, a low, sprawling brick building constructed in 1963, with all the architectural charm of a government office. But within its beige walls, something was stirring that would challenge everything this conservative farming community thought it knew about authority, nutrition, and the revolutionary potential of really good meatloaf. It started, as so many revolutions do, with a woman who was tired of being invisible. Her name was Dolores Martinez, though everyone called her Dolly, and she had been serving lunch to the teenagers of Willow Creek for 14 years. At 52, she had the kind of practical beauty that came from a lifetime of hard work, calloused hands, that could flip 100 hamburgers without breaking a sweat, graying hair that she kept pinned back in a no-nonsense bun, and eyes that missed nothing despite being hidden behind wire-rimmed glasses that had gone out of style sometime around 1975. Dolly had taken the job at Willow Creek High in 1973. Shortly after her husband, Carlos, was laid off from the Chrysler plant in nearby Anderson. What was supposed to be temporary work to help make ends meet had stretched into a decade and a half, as Carlos struggled to find steady employment, and their 3 children grew from elementary schoolers into young adults with college dreams that required every penny they could save. The cafeteria where Dolly worked was a monument to institutional efficiency. Long metal tables that seated 8 students each, fluorescent lights that cast everything in a harsh, unflattering glow, and serving lines that could process 600 students in exactly 47 minutes. A statistic that the principal, Mr. Frederick Hartwell, mentioned with pride during every school board meeting. But efficiency, as Dolly had learned over her years behind the serving counter, was not the same thing as caring. And despite what the nutritional charts posted in the administrative offices might claim, serving food was not the same thing as nourishing people. Dolly had watched thousands of teenagers pass through her lunch line over the years. She had seen the shy freshmen who were too intimidated to ask for extra helpings, the seniors who skipped lunch because they'd spent their money on cigarettes, the kids who qualified for free meals but were too proud to use the special tickets that marked them as poor. She had noticed which students came to school without breakfast, which ones hoarded extra rolls in their backpacks, which ones pushed food around their plates because they were too stressed about tests or heartbreak or family problems to eat. Most of all, she had watched her colleagues, the other women who worked in the cafeteria, and she had seen how their knowledge, their insights, their genuine concern for the students was systematically ignored by the administrators who made decisions about school food service. The cafeteria staff consisted of 5 women, and like Dolly, they had all started working there out of economic necessity rather than career ambition. There was Betty Thompson, a 60-year-old grandmother whose husband had died in a farming accident, leaving her to support herself on Social Security and whatever she could earn from part-time work. There was Janet Kim, whose family had moved to Willow Creek from California when her father took over management of the agricultural supply store, and who had discovered that a degree in chemistry from UCLA meant very little in a town where Asian faces were still unusual enough to draw stares. Sandra Williams was a young single mother whose ex-husband had left town without paying child support, forcing her to drop out of her nursing program at the community college to take any job that would let her support her 4-year-old daughter. And there was Rose Kowalski, whose Polish immigrant parents had instilled in her a deep belief in the importance of good food and hard work, and who treated the industrial kitchen like her own personal domain, knowing every recipe by heart and every student's dietary preferences by name. These 5 women had worked together long enough to develop the kind of seamless cooperation that comes from shared purpose and mutual respect. They could prepare and serve lunch for 600 students with a minimum of waste, maximum efficiency, and a level of food safety that exceeded state requirements. They knew which students had food allergies, which ones were vegetarians, which ones would benefit from an encouraging word or an extra cookie slipped onto their tray when no one was looking. But their expertise was invisible to the school administration, to Principal Hartwell and the school board members who made policy decisions. The cafeteria staff were simply part of the infrastructure, as interchangeable as the industrial dishwashers and steam tables they operated. The food service program at Willow Creek High was managed according to strict federal guidelines that dictated everything from portion sizes to nutritional content to purchasing procedures. Meals were planned by a district nutritionist who had never worked in a school kitchen, ordered from suppliers who bid based on price rather than quality, and prepared according to standardized recipes that prioritized shelf life over flavor. The result was food that met all official requirements for balanced nutrition, while being almost completely divorced from anything that might inspire appetite or satisfaction. Vegetables arrived frozen in institutional-sized bags and were steamed until they achieved a uniform gray color. Meat came pre-portioned and pre-seasoned, designed to be edible rather than enjoyable. Bread was mass-produced by a regional bakery that specialized in products that could survive weeks in storage without becoming inedible. For years, Dolly and her colleagues had accepted this system as an unchangeable fact of institutional life. They did their best to prepare the mandated meals with care and attention, adding what small touches they could. A sprinkle of herbs that Janet smuggled in from her garden, an extra moment of attention to ensure that hot foods stayed hot and cold foods stayed cold, a friendly smile, and a kind word for students who seemed to need encouragement. But by the spring of 1987, Dolly found herself increasingly frustrated by the limitations of what she could accomplish within the constraints of district policy. She had been watching the students who came through her line for 14 years, and she had developed strong opinions about what they needed, what they would eat, and what they deserved. She had watched as childhood obesity rates began to climb, as more students arrived at school having eaten nothing but sugar, cereal, or convenience store snacks for breakfast. She had seen how students' energy levels and attention spans fluctuated depending on what they had eaten, how the mid-afternoon sugar crash affected their ability to learn during last period classes. Most frustrating of all, she had watched as millions of dollars worth of food was thrown away each year because students found the institutional meals so unappetizing that they would rather go hungry than eat what was served to them. The catalyst that transformed Dolly's frustration into action came on a rainy Tuesday morning in April, during the kind of spring storm that turns Indiana roads into muddy rivers and makes everyone irritable with cabin fever. Dolly arrived at work at 5:30 a.m., as she had every school day for 14 years, and began the familiar routine of preparing breakfast for the 200 students who participated in the free breakfast program. As she opened the industrial-sized containers of powdered eggs and frozen sausage patties, she found herself thinking about the breakfast she had prepared for her own family. That morning, fresh eggs from the chickens her neighbor kept, sausage from pork her brother-in-law had raised on his farm, biscuits made from her grandmother's recipe. The contrast was stark and depressing. Her family ate real food, prepared with care and attention. The students she served ate products that had been engineered in laboratories and manufactured in facilities that prioritized efficiency over nutrition or flavor. As she mechanically stirred the powdered eggs and arranged the sausage patties on industrial sheet pans, Dolly found herself wondering why this had to be the case. Why couldn't school food be nourishing and delicious? Why couldn't students learn to appreciate good food as part of their education? Why couldn't the cafeteria be a place where young people discovered new flavors and developed healthy eating habits that would serve them throughout their lives? The immediate answer was, of course, money. The district food service budget was based on the assumption that meals would cost no more than $1.23 per student, including labor, utilities, and overhead. Fresh, locally sourced ingredients were more expensive than frozen, processed alternatives. Cooking from scratch required more skilled labor than heating pre-made products. But as Dolly went through her morning routine, she began to wonder whether the budget constraints were as absolute as they seemed. She knew that the cafeteria regularly threw away huge quantities of food that students wouldn't eat. She knew that the district spent thousands of dollars each year on cleaning supplies and equipment, repairs that might be unnecessary if they were preparing fresher, less processed foods. She knew that there were local farmers who might be willing to sell directly to the school if it meant having a reliable customer for their produce. Most importantly, she knew that she and her colleagues possessed knowledge and skills that were not being utilized by the current food service system. They understood cooking techniques that could make healthy foods more appealing. They knew which flavors and combinations students preferred. They had ideas for reducing waste and controlling costs that had never been solicited or considered by the administration. As the morning progressed, and Dolly served breakfast to sleepy teenagers who mechanically chewed their rubbery eggs and artificial sausage, she made a decision that would change not only her own life, but the entire culture of Willow Creek High School. She decided that she was going to prove that school food could be better. That afternoon, after the last lunch tray had been washed and the kitchen had been cleaned and sanitized for the next day, Dolly asked her 4 colleagues to stay for a few minutes. The 5 women gathered around one of the metal preparation tables, their voices echoing slightly in the empty cafeteria. "I want to try something," Dolly said without preamble. "I want to see if we can make better food for these kids without spending more money." Betty Thompson, who had been working in food service longer than any of them, looked skeptical. "Dolly, you know we have to follow the meal plans from the district office. We can't just change the menu." "I'm not talking about changing the official menu," Dolly replied. "I'm talking about making the same foods taste better, using the same ingredients, but preparing them differently, adding things that don't cost extra, but make a difference in flavor." Janet Kim leaned forward with interest. "Like what?" "Like actually seasoning the vegetables instead of just steaming them until they're dead. Like browning the meat instead of just warming it up. Like making real mashed potatoes instead of using that powder that tastes like wallpaper paste. Rose Kowalski nodded enthusiastically. My grandmother used to say that cooking without love is just chemistry, and chemistry without heart is just poison. Sandra Williams, who was always practical about money matters, asked the crucial question: how do we do that without getting in trouble with Mr. Hartwell? You know he's not going to approve anything that isn't in the district guidelines. Dolly had been thinking about this problem all day. We don't ask for permission, she said quietly. We just do it and see what happens. If the kids like the food better, if they eat more and waste less, if we can prove that our way is better, then maybe the administration will listen. It was a risky strategy. All 5 women knew that their jobs could be in jeopardy if they were caught deviating from approved procedures. But they also knew that they were good at their work, that finding replacements for their positions would be difficult, and that their years of reliable service had earned them at least some benefit of the doubt from their supervisors. Over the next week, the 5 women began to implement what they privately called the Great Cafeteria Experiment. They made small changes that were barely noticeable individually, but that added up to significant improvements in food quality and flavor. Instead of steaming vegetables until they were mushy, they learned to blanch them quickly to preserve color, texture, and nutrients. Instead of using the premixed seasonings specified in district recipes, they created their own blends using herbs and spices that Janet grew in her garden. Instead of serving meat that had been cooked hours earlier and kept warm under heat lamps, they learned to time their preparation so that hot foods were actually hot when students received them. They began making small substitutions, using real butter instead of margarine when the cost difference was negligible, adding fresh onions and garlic to recipes that called for powdered alternatives, incorporating small amounts of fresh herbs and vegetables that they purchased with their own money and smuggled into the kitchen. Most importantly, they began paying attention to presentation. Instead of simply slopping food onto trays, they took time to arrange it attractively. They created colorful combinations of foods that were appealing to look at. They used garnishes and small decorative touches that made institutional meals look more like restaurant presentations. The changes were subtle, but the results were immediate and dramatic. Students who had previously picked at their food or thrown it away, untouched, began cleaning their plates. The lunch line moved more slowly because students were taking time to look at their options instead of just grabbing whatever was closest. Teachers began commenting on how much better the cafeteria smelled during lunch periods. Most telling of all, the amount of food waste began to decrease significantly. The industrial garbage disposals that had previously processed hundreds of pounds of discarded food each day were running nearly empty. Students were eating what they were served, and even asking for second helpings of items they had never shown interest in before. After 2 weeks of the experiment, the 5 women gathered again after work to assess their progress. The results were encouraging, but also somewhat overwhelming. The improved food quality was requiring more time and attention than they had anticipated. They were arriving at work earlier, staying later, and working more intensively during the day to achieve the results they wanted. "We can't keep this up indefinitely," Sandra warned. "I'm already exhausted, and we haven't even told anyone what we're doing yet." "But look at the results," Janet argued, pointing to the daily food waste reports they had been secretly tracking. "We're throwing away 60% less food than we were a month ago. The students are actually eating what we serve them." Betty, who had been the most skeptical about the experiment, admitted that she was seeing changes in student behavior that went beyond simple food consumption. "Some of these kids are more alert in the afternoon," she observed. "They're not crashing from sugar highs or falling asleep because they didn't eat anything." Rose had been keeping informal notes about student reactions and reported that the positive changes were extending beyond the cafeteria. "Mrs. Patterson told me that her afternoon classes have been more attentive lately." Mr. Rodriguez said the same thing. "I don't think it's a coincidence." Dolly listened to her colleagues' observations and felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. They were proving that their intuitions about food and nutrition were correct, but they were also venturing into territory that could bring them into conflict with the administration. "We need to be more systematic about this," she decided. "If we're going to convince anyone that what we're doing is worth supporting, we need to have data and documentation." Over the following weeks, the 5 women began to conduct what amounted to an informal research study. They kept detailed records of food costs, preparation times, waste levels, and student satisfaction. They tracked which menu items were most popular, which preparation methods were most efficient, and which changes had the greatest impact on both nutrition and appeal. They also began to reach out informally to teachers and other staff members, asking for their observations about student behavior and energy levels during afternoon classes. They didn't reveal that they were conducting experiments with the food service, but they gathered information about whether educators had noticed any changes in student attention spans, mood, or participation. What they discovered was that their improvements in food quality were having measurable effects that extended far beyond the cafeteria. Teachers reported that students seemed more focused and energetic during afternoon classes. The school nurse noted a decrease in stomach complaints and headaches among students who ate school lunch. Even the custodial staff commented that there was less food-related mess in the hallways and classrooms. But the most significant discovery was financial. Despite their fears about increased costs, the women found that their improved preparation methods were actually saving money. The reduction in food waste more than offset the expense of better ingredients and more labor-intensive preparation methods. They were serving more appealing food while spending less per meal than the district's standard recipes required. By the end of May, as the school year was drawing to a close, the 5 women had accumulated enough data to demonstrate conclusively that their approach to food service was superior to the district's standardized system in every measurable way. They were serving more nutritious and appealing food while reducing costs and waste, but they still faced the challenge of convincing the school administration that their informal experiments should be adopted as official policy. They needed to find a way to present their findings that would be taken seriously by people who had never worked in food service and who might be skeptical of innovations that came from employees rather than from official channels. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. Principal Hartwell had been under pressure from the school board to address declining test scores and increasing discipline problems among students. He had been exploring various educational interventions and administrative changes, but he had not considered the possibility that nutrition might be affecting student performance. However, several teachers had independently approached him with observations about improved student behavior during the final months of the school year. They reported that students seemed more attentive, less irritable, and more cooperative during afternoon classes. The changes were significant enough that some teachers were wondering whether the district had made some change in scheduling or curriculum that they hadn't been informed about. Intrigued by these reports, Mr. Hartwell began to investigate possible causes for the improvement in student behavior. He consulted with the district's psychological services coordinator, reviewed attendance and discipline statistics, and even considered whether seasonal weather patterns might be affecting student mood. It was during this investigation that he discovered the changes that had been taking place in the cafeteria. A routine review of food service expenses revealed that waste disposal costs had decreased significantly during the spring semester, and further inquiry revealed that food waste itself had dropped to levels that were unprecedented in the district's records. When Mr. Hartwell questioned the cafeteria supervisor about these changes, he was referred to Dolly Martinez and her colleagues, who found themselves summoned to his office on a June afternoon to explain what they had been doing and why. The meeting was tense and formal, with the 5 women sitting on one side of Principal Hartwell's desk while he reviewed food service reports and expense records. Dolly served as spokesperson for the group, explaining their concerns about food quality and student nutrition, describing the changes they had implemented, and presenting the data they had collected about costs, waste, and student satisfaction. Mr. Hartwell listened to their presentation with the kind of careful attention he usually reserved for school board meetings or parent conferences. He asked detailed questions about their methods, their results, and their recommendations for future improvements. He was particularly interested in the financial data, which showed conclusively that higher quality food preparation could actually reduce overall costs while improving student satisfaction. But what impressed him most was the evidence that improved nutrition was affecting student academic performance. The correlation between better food and improved afternoon class behavior was exactly the kind of measurable educational outcome that the school board was demanding from all district programs. "Why didn't you come to me before implementing these changes?" he asked. Dolly exchanged glances with her colleagues before answering carefully. "We weren't sure anyone would listen to us," she admitted. "We're just cafeteria workers. We didn't think our opinions about food service would be taken seriously by the administration." Mr. Hartwell was quiet for a moment, perhaps recognizing the truth in her statement. "Well," he finally said, "I'm listening now, and I want to know what you think we should do next." Over the summer of 1987, Principal Hartwell worked with Dolly and her colleagues to develop a proposal for expanding their food service improvements throughout the district. They documented their methods, calculated projected costs and savings, and developed implementation plans that could be adopted by other schools. The proposal was presented to the school board in August, just before the start of the new school year. The presentation included not only financial projections and operational details, but also testimonials from teachers about improved student behavior, data about reduced food waste and increased student satisfaction, and evidence that better nutrition was contributing to better academic performance. The school board's response was overwhelmingly positive. Board members were impressed by the initiative shown by the cafeteria staff, excited about the potential for cost savings, and particularly interested in any program that might improve student test scores and behavior. The proposal was approved unanimously, with additional funding provided for equipment upgrades, staff training, and expanded ingredient budgets. The Willow Creek Food Service Program was designated as a pilot project that would be studied and potentially replicated throughout the district if it continued to produce positive results. But the most significant change was in the status and recognition accorded to the cafeteria staff. Dolly was promoted to food service manager with authority to make purchasing decisions and modify menus based on student needs and preferences. Her colleagues were given pay raises and additional training opportunities that recognized their expertise in nutrition and food preparation. Most importantly, they were given a voice in policy decisions that affected their work and the students they served. The district established a food service advisory committee that included cafeteria staff alongside administrators, parents, and students, ensuring that future changes would be based on input from the people who actually prepared and served the meals. The improved food service program at Willow Creek High became a model that was studied and replicated throughout Indiana and neighboring states. Dolly was invited to speak at conferences about school nutrition, and the cafeteria staff received recognition from state education officials for their innovation and dedication. But the most satisfying recognition came from the students themselves. Test scores improved significantly during the 1980-719-88 school year, with particularly notable gains in afternoon subjects that had previously been affected by post-lunch fatigue and poor concentration. Discipline problems decreased, attendance improved, and teachers reported that students seemed more engaged and enthusiastic about learning. The changes rippled through the entire school community in ways that no one had anticipated. Parents began to hear from their children about how much they enjoyed school lunch, and many began to request recipes and cooking tips from the cafeteria staff. Local farmers started selling directly to the school, creating economic benefits that extended throughout the surrounding agricultural community. Perhaps most importantly, students began to develop more sophisticated palates and healthier eating habits that they carried home and maintained throughout their lives. The cafeteria became an informal classroom where young people learned about nutrition, food preparation, and the connection between diet and overall health. The success of the Willow Creek program led to Dolly being recruited for a position with the state education department, where she worked to develop nutrition guidelines and training programs for school food service throughout Indiana. Her colleagues continued working at Willow Creek High, but they also became consultants who helped other schools implement similar improvements to their food service programs. Betty Thompson, who had been the most skeptical about the original experiments, became one of the most enthusiastic advocates for school food service reform. She traveled throughout the Midwest, speaking at conferences and training workshops about the importance of treating food service as an integral part of education, rather than just a logistical necessity. Janet Kim used her chemistry background to develop new recipes and preparation methods that maximized nutrition while controlling costs. She eventually completed a graduate degree in nutrition science and became a researcher who studied the relationship between diet and academic performance. Sandra Williams was able to return to nursing school, using her experience in food service to specialize in pediatric nutrition. She eventually became a nurse practitioner who worked with schools and community health organizations to address childhood obesity and related health issues. Rose Kowalski remained at Willow Creek High until her retirement, but she also established a catering business that specialized in healthy, appealing meals for community events and celebrations. Her recipes and cooking methods became part of the cultural heritage of Willow Creek, passed down through families and community organizations. The story of the Willow Creek cafeteria staff became part of the folklore of school nutrition reform, but it also represented something larger about the potential for positive change when dedicated employees are given the support and recognition they need to excel in their work. The 5 women had demonstrated that expertise and innovation could come from any level of an organization, that the people who perform work on a daily basis often have insights that are unavailable to managers who make decisions based on abstract policies and theoretical models. They had also proven that small changes, implemented thoughtfully and systematically, could have profound effects that extended far beyond their immediate scope. Better food had led to better student behavior, which had led to improved academic performance, which had contributed to stronger community support for public education. But perhaps most importantly, they had shown that caring about quality and taking pride in one's work could transform even the most mundane tasks into meaningful contributions to human welfare and community development. The legacy of their work continued to influence school nutrition policies for decades after their original experiments. The principles they had demonstrated, that food should be nutritious and appealing, that preparation methods matter as much as ingredients, that student preferences and satisfaction should be considered alongside administrative efficiency, became standard features of progressive school food service programs throughout the country. Their story also became an inspiration for other groups of workers who possessed expertise and insights that were not being utilized by the organizations where they worked. The techniques they had developed, careful observation, systematic documentation, collaborative problem solving, and strategic presentation of findings, became a model for bottom-up organizational change that was studied and applied in many different contexts. But in Willow Creek, Indiana, the most visible legacy of their work remained in the high school cafeteria itself, where their recipes and methods continued to be used long after they had moved on to other opportunities. Generations of students grew up eating food that had been prepared with care and attention, developing healthy eating habits and an appreciation for good nutrition that served them throughout their lives. The cafeteria that had once been a sterile, institutional space became a warm, welcoming environment where students lingered to talk with friends, where the aroma of fresh-cooked food created an atmosphere of comfort and community, where lunch period became one of the most pleasant parts of the school day. Teachers who had worked at the school before and after the changes often remarked that the transformation of the food service had changed the entire culture of the school. Students were more positive about their educational experience when they felt cared for and well-fed. They developed stronger connections to the school community when they could take pride in the quality of their cafeteria. They learned important lessons about nutrition, health, and the value of hard work by observing the dedication and expertise of the women who prepared their meals. Today, school nutrition continues to be a subject of public debate and policy development, with ongoing discussions about the balance between cost-effectiveness and food quality, between between standardized efficiency and local preferences, between regulatory compliance and educational value. But the example of Dolly Martinez and her colleagues at Willow Creek High School remains relevant and inspiring for anyone who believes that institutions can be improved by the people who work within them, that expertise can emerge from unexpected sources, and that caring about quality can make a difference even in the most bureaucratic and constrained environments. Their story reminds us that revolutions don't always require dramatic gestures or confrontational politics. Sometimes, the most profound changes begin with someone who cares enough to do their job a little better, who refuses to accept that mediocrity is inevitable, who believes that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and provided with the best possible service. In a high school cafeteria in a small Indiana town, 5 women discovered that they had the power to change lives, one lunch tray at a time. They proved that institutional food could be delicious and nutritious, that students would choose healthy options when they were prepared with skill and presented with care, and that investing in food quality was really investing in human potential. Their quiet revolution transformed not only their own workplace, but their entire community, creating ripple effects that continued to benefit students, families, and educators for decades after their original experiments. They demonstrated that the most important changes often happen not through grand gestures or policy mandates, but through the daily commitment of people who care about doing their work well and serving others with compassion and excellence. And sometimes, late at night, when the school is empty and quiet, visitors say you can still catch the faint aroma of fresh-baked bread and simmering soup drifting through the hallways, a reminder that love and care can transform even the most ordinary places into something special, something memorable, something that makes a difference in the lives of everyone it touches. Sleep well tonight, knowing that in cafeterias and workplaces around the world, there are people like Dolly and her colleagues, quietly working to make things better, one small improvement at a time. Dream of the power we all possess to care a little more, to try a little harder, to believe that our daily work matters, and that excellence is always possible, even in the most humble circumstances. The revolution continues, one meal, one student, one act of caring at a time. But our story doesn't end with that first triumph in 1987. Like all meaningful changes, the cafeteria revolution at Willow Creek High School had consequences that rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted, touching lives and inspiring changes that would continue for decades to come. By 1990, 3 years after Dolly Martinez and her colleagues had transformed their cafeteria from an institutional feeding operation into something approaching a community kitchen, the effects of their work had spread far beyond the school walls. The success of the Willow Creek program had attracted attention from researchers, educators, and policymakers throughout the Midwest. But it had also created unexpected challenges and opportunities. that tested the commitment and resilience of everyone involved. The first major challenge came from an unexpected source: the students themselves. The teenagers who had grown up eating the improved cafeteria food had developed sophisticated palates and high expectations that followed them when they left Willow Creek High. College-bound seniors complained bitterly about the institutional food they encountered in university dining halls. Students who took jobs at fast food restaurants found themselves frustrated by the contrast between what they had learned to expect from school meals and what they were now serving to customers. More significantly, the students had become advocates for good food in their own families and communities. They pressured their parents to shop for better ingredients, to spend more time on meal preparation, to consider the nutritional and environmental implications of their food choices. They challenged local restaurants to improve their offerings, organized boycotts of establishments that served poor quality food, and even started small businesses selling homemade versions of their favorite cafeteria recipes. This generational shift in food consciousness created tensions within families and communities that no one had anticipated. Parents who had grown up accepting that school food was supposed to be bland and institutional found themselves criticized by their own children for serving processed convenience foods. Local restaurant owners complained that they were losing young customers who had been spoiled by unrealistic expectations about food quality and freshness. The economic implications were also more complex than anyone had expected. While the cafeteria program itself had proven cost-effective, its success had created demand for locally sourced ingredients that strained the capacity of area farmers and food producers. Small-scale farmers who had initially welcomed the opportunity to sell directly to the school found themselves overwhelmed by orders they couldn't fulfill. Prices for locally grown produce began to rise as demand exceeded supply. Some community members began to question whether the school district should be spending taxpayer money on what they saw as unnecessarily expensive food programs. At a heated school board meeting in November 1989, Farmer Bill Henderson, no relation to Dolly despite the shared name, argued that the cafeteria program had gotten too fancy for its own good. These kids need to learn to eat what's put in front of them, not expect restaurant-quality meals at school, he declared. We're raising a generation of food snobs who won't be able to adapt to the real world. The criticism stung, particularly because it came from community members whose support had been crucial to the program's initial success. Dolly, who by then had been promoted to District Food Service Coordinator, found herself defending not just her methods, but her fundamental philosophy about the importance of good nutrition and food quality. We're not raising food snobs, she replied during that same school board meeting. We're raising young people who understand that they deserve to be nourished properly, who know the difference between food that supports their health and food that undermines it. If that's snobbery, then I I guess we need more snobs in this world. The debate reflected deeper tensions within American society about class, expectations, and the role of public institutions in shaping cultural values. Some community members worried that the emphasis on food quality was creating artificial distinctions between those who could afford good food and those who couldn't. Others argued that teaching students to appreciate quality was an important life skill that would serve them well regardless of their economic circumstances. The controversy reached a peak in early 1990 when a regional newspaper published an article titled "Gourmet Lunches" or "Educational Frills." The article questioned whether school districts should be wasting money on fancy food programs when they could be investing in computers, textbooks, and other educational resources. The article featured quotes from critics who argued that the Willow Creek program represented misplaced priorities and fiscal irresponsibility. It suggested that students would be better served by learning to eat simple, inexpensive foods that they would be able to afford as adults. But it also included powerful testimonials from teachers, students, and parents about the positive effects of the program. Sarah Chen, a math teacher at Willow Creek High, described how her afternoon classes had become more productive and focused since the food service improvements had been implemented. "I can tell which students ate lunch and which ones didn't," she said. "The kids who eat well-prepared, nutritious meals are more alert, more engaged, and better able to handle complex problems." Michael Rodriguez, a 1989 graduate who was then attending Indiana University, wrote a letter to the newspaper describing how the Willow Creek food program had affected his college experience. "I know it sounds strange, but learning to appreciate good food in high school taught me to take care of myself in ways that go far beyond nutrition. I learned that I was worth the effort it takes to prepare healthy meals, that paying attention to what I eat is a form of self-respect. Those lessons have helped me succeed in college and will help me throughout my life." Perhaps the most compelling testimony came from Dr. Patricia Williams, a pediatrician who had been tracking health outcomes among Willow Creek students. Her informal study, conducted over 3 years, showed statistically significant improvements in several health indicators among students who regularly ate school meals compared to those from previous years. "We're seeing fewer cases of anemia, particularly among female students," Dr. Williams reported. "Obesity rates have stabilized for the first time in a decade. Perhaps most importantly, we're seeing evidence that students are making better food choices outside of school as well." The newspaper coverage, rather than undermining the program, actually strengthened community support by providing a forum for supporters to articulate the benefits they had observed. The controversy also attracted attention from state education officials who were facing pressure to address rising childhood obesity rates and declining academic performance in rural communities. In June 1990, the Indiana Department of Education announced a pilot program that would provide grants to 20 school districts throughout the state to implement food service improvements based on the Willow Creek model. Dolly Martinez was asked to lead the training and implementation effort, a recognition that marked her transformation from cafeteria worker to statewide education policy leader. The pilot program required Dolly to travel throughout Indiana, visiting schools in communities that ranged from inner-city Indianapolis to rural farming towns that made Willow Creek look cosmopolitan by comparison. Each community presented unique challenges that required adapting the basic principles of good food service to local conditions and preferences. In Gary, Indiana, she worked with a predominantly African American school where many students qualified for free lunch, but were suspicious of changes to foods that represented comfort and familiarity. The challenge was to improve nutrition and quality while respecting cultural preferences and food traditions that were important to students' sense of identity. Working with the local cafeteria staff, Dolly learned to prepare soul food classics using healthier ingredients and cooking methods. They developed recipes for baked rather than fried chicken, whole grain versions of cornbread and biscuits, and vegetable dishes that incorporated traditional seasonings and flavors while increasing nutritional content. The process required months of experimentation and adjustment, with cafeteria workers acting as cultural interpreters who helped bridge the gap between nutritional goals and student preferences. The success of these efforts demonstrated that food service improvements could be adapted to any cultural context, but only through collaboration with people who understood local tastes and traditions. In a small farming community near the Illinois border, Dolly encountered a different set of challenges. The local economy was struggling due to changes in agriculture, and many families were dealing with financial stress that made them particularly sensitive to any perceived wasteful spending by the school district. Here, the key was demonstrating that better food service could actually save money while supporting local farmers who were struggling to find markets for their produce. By establishing direct purchasing relationships between the school and area farmers, they were able to obtain fresh ingredients at prices competitive with processed alternatives, while keeping money within the local economy. The program also created opportunities for students to learn about agriculture and food production through field trips to participating farms and classroom visits from local farmers who explained how food moved from farm to table. These educational components helped build community support by demonstrating that the food service program was contributing to student learning in ways that extended beyond nutrition. But perhaps the most challenging implementation was in a suburban Indianapolis school district where parents had high expectations for their children's educational experiences and were skeptical of any program that seemed to prioritize food over academics. Here, Dolly had to demonstrate that good nutrition was not a distraction from education, but a foundation that made learning more effective. She worked with teachers and administrators to document the connections between meal quality and academic performance, showing how better nutrition led to improved test scores, reduced absenteeism, and fewer behavioral problems. The suburban parents were initially resistant to changes that they perceived as unnecessarily expensive or time-consuming. But when they saw measurable improvements in their children's academic performance and overall well-being, they became some of the program's strongest advocates. By 1992, the Indiana pilot program had been declared a success, with participating schools showing improvements in student nutrition, academic performance, and community satisfaction with their food service programs. The model was adopted as official state policy, with funding provided to help all school districts implement similar improvements. The success of the Indiana program attracted national attention. Dolly was invited to speak at conferences throughout the United States, sharing her experience and helping other states develop their own school food service improvement initiatives. She testified before Congress about the importance of nutrition in education and served on federal advisory committees that developed new guidelines for school meal programs. But even as her influence expanded to the national level, Dolly remained connected to the practical realities of cafeteria work and committed to the principle that meaningful change had to come from the people who actually prepared and served food to students. She continued to spend time working alongside cafeteria staff in schools throughout Indiana, learning about local challenges and developing solutions that could be adapted to different circumstances. She insisted that any training programs or policy recommendations should be developed in collaboration with experienced food service workers, rather than imposed by outside experts who had never worked in school kitchens. This grassroots approach to policy development was unusual in education, where reforms were typically designed by administrators or consultants, and then implemented by teachers and staff who had little input into the process. Dolly's success in creating lasting change was directly related to her understanding that sustainable improvements had to be supported by the people who would be responsible for implementing them on a daily basis. The approach also recognized that expertise could come from unexpected sources, and that the people who seemed to have the least formal authority often possessed the most practical knowledge about how to solve complex problems. By the mid-1990s, variations of the Willow Creek model were being implemented in schools throughout the United States. The basic principles, emphasizing fresh ingredients, improving preparation methods, respecting student preferences, and measuring success through both nutritional and educational outcomes, had proven adaptable to a wide range of community contexts and cultural preferences. But the most lasting impact of Dolly Martinez's work may have been the way it changed expectations about the role of food service in education. Before the Willow Creek experiments, school cafeterias were generally viewed as necessary but unimportant facilities that provided basic nutrition to students who needed it. The success of the food service improvements demonstrated that cafeterias could be educational spaces where students learned about nutrition, cultural diversity, environmental sustainability, and the importance of caring for their own health and well-being. Good school food became recognized as an investment in student learning rather than just an operational expense. The change in perspective also affected how food service workers were viewed and treated within educational institutions. Jobs that had previously been considered unskilled labor, requiring little training or expertise, became recognized as specialized positions that required knowledge of nutrition, food safety, cultural sensitivity, and child development. Many school districts began requiring additional training and education for food service workers, providing opportunities for career advancement that had not previously existed. Some universities developed degree programs specifically designed for school nutrition professionals, and professional organizations emerged to support ongoing education and advocacy within the field. Betty Thompson, who had been skeptical of the original cafeteria experiments at Willow Creek, became one of the most effective advocates for recognizing food service as a professional field requiring specialized knowledge and skills. She testified before state legislatures about the importance of proper training and compensation for school nutrition workers. For too long, people have thought that anyone can work in a school kitchen, she said during one such hearing. But preparing nutritious, appealing meals for hundreds of children every day requires skills that most people don't have. We need to start treating food service as the professional field it really is. Janet Kim used her background in chemistry to develop new approaches to food safety and nutrition education. She created training materials that helped food service workers understand the scientific principles behind safe food handling and nutritious meal planning. Her work contributed to significant improvements in food safety standards throughout the school nutrition field. Sandra Williams, who had returned to nursing school with support from the Willow Creek program, specialized in pediatric nutrition and became a researcher studying the relationship between school meals and child health outcomes. Her work provided scientific evidence supporting the kind of intuitive understanding that had motivated the original cafeteria experiments. Rose Kowalski remained at Willow Creek High School throughout her career, but she also became a mentor for food service workers throughout the region. Her patient, encouraging approach to training helped hundreds of cafeteria workers develop the skills and confidence they needed to improve their food service programs. The personal relationships formed among the original 5 women continued throughout their lives, even as their careers took them in different directions. They maintained regular contact, sharing updates about their work and their families celebrating successes and providing support during difficult times. They also continued to collaborate on projects related to school nutrition and food service improvement. In 1995, they co-authored a book titled From Our Kitchen to Yours, Lessons from the School Cafeteria, that combined practical advice about food preparation with reflections on the importance of caring for others through food. The book became a bestseller within the school nutrition community and was used as a textbook in training programs throughout the country. It emphasized the human relationships that were at the heart of good food service, arguing that technical skills were important, but that genuine care for students was the most crucial ingredient in any successful program. Cooking is a form of communication, they wrote. Every meal we prepare sends a message to the people who eat it. We can say, "You don't matter," by serving food that is carelessly prepared and unappetizing. Or we can say, "You are valued and deserves our best effort," by taking the time to prepare food that nourishes both body and spirit. The book also addressed the broader social and economic factors that affected school nutrition, acknowledging the constraints and challenges faced by food service workers, while arguing that those limitations did not excuse accepting mediocrity. We understand that budgets are tight and time is limited, they wrote. But we also know that caring costs nothing extra, that attention to detail doesn't require expensive ingredients, and that respect for the people we serve makes every meal more meaningful. By the time Dolly Martinez retired from the Indiana Department of Education in 2005, the principles and practices that had emerged from the Willow Creek cafeteria experiments had been adopted by school districts throughout the United States. The federal government had incorporated many of their recommendations into national school meal guidelines, and several states had mandated training programs based on their methods. But Dolly's retirement was not the end of her involvement in school nutrition. She continued to work as a consultant and speaker, helping communities develop their own food service improvement programs. She also established a foundation that provided grants to support innovative approaches to school nutrition and food service training. The foundation's work reflected Dolly's continuing belief that meaningful change had to come from the grassroots level, that the people who worked directly with students were the best source of ideas for improving their experiences. Rather than funding large-scale programs developed by outside experts, the foundation supported small grants that allowed cafeteria workers, teachers, and students to experiment with new approaches to nutrition education and food service. Many of these experiments failed, but the successful ones often provided insights that were more valuable than the results of much larger and more expensive research projects. The Foundation's annual reports documented dozens of creative approaches to addressing nutrition challenges, from school gardens tended by students to partnerships with local restaurants that provided culinary training for food service workers. The foundation also supported efforts to document and preserve the knowledge and experience of veteran food service workers who were nearing retirement. Too often, the practical wisdom accumulated over decades of experience was lost when experienced workers retired, forcing their replacements to learn everything from scratch. By creating oral history projects and mentoring programs, the foundation helped ensure that valuable knowledge was passed down to new generations of food service professionals. These efforts recognized that expertise developed through daily practice was just as valuable as formal education or training. As the 21st century progressed, new challenges emerged that tested the adaptability and resilience of the approaches that Dolly and her colleagues had pioneered. Childhood obesity rates continued to climb, despite widespread implementation of improved school nutrition programs. Food allergies became more common and more severe, requiring new approaches to menu planning and food preparation. The rise of social media created new pressures and opportunities for school nutrition programs. Students began posting photos of their school meals online, creating instant feedback about food quality and presentation. Negative posts could damage a school's reputation, while positive ones could become powerful recruiting tools. Some food service directors initially viewed social media as a threat, but others learned to use it as a tool for engaging with students and improving their programs. They encouraged students to share photos of particularly appealing meals, created online forums for discussing menu preferences, and used student feedback to guide menu development. The COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2020 created unprecedented challenges for school nutrition programs. Schools were forced to close or operate with limited capacity, disrupting the meal service that many students depended on for proper nutrition. Food service workers throughout the country demonstrated remarkable creativity and dedication in adapting to these challenges. They developed grab-and-go meal programs, organized food delivery services, and created outdoor feeding sites that allowed them to continue serving students while maintaining social distancing requirements. The pandemic also highlighted the crucial role that school meals played in addressing food insecurity among children and families. For many students, school breakfast and lunch were their primary sources of reliable, nutritious food. When schools closed, families faced real hardship in replacing those meals. The response of school nutrition programs during the pandemic demonstrated the validity of the principles that Dolly Martinez and her colleagues had articulated decades earlier. That food service was not just about feeding students, but about caring for their overall well-being. That flexibility and creativity were essential for meeting changing needs, and that the people who worked directly with students were the best source of solutions to complex problems. Today, visitors to Willow Creek High School can still see evidence of the transformation that began in 1987. cafeteria has been renovated several times, but it maintains the warm, welcoming atmosphere that was created when 5 women decided that students deserved better food than they were receiving. The current food service director, Maria Santos, Sandra Williams' daughter, who followed her mother into nutrition work, continues to emphasize the importance of preparing food with care and attention to student needs and preferences. The menu still includes some of the recipes that were developed during those early experiments, adapted and updated to meet current nutritional guidelines and student tastes. The school's nutrition program has expanded to include extensive gardens where students grow vegetables that are used in the cafeteria, cooking classes that teach life skills alongside academic subjects, and partnerships with local farms and food businesses that provide both ingredients and learning opportunities. But perhaps the most important legacy of the original cafeteria revolution is the understanding that every person who works in a school has the potential to make a meaningful difference in students' lives. The example of Dolly Martinez and her colleagues demonstrated that positive change could come from any level of an organization, that expertise and insight were not limited to people with formal authority or advanced degrees. Their story continues to inspire educators, food service workers, and community members who believe that all students deserve to be treated with respect and provided with the best possible care. It serves as a reminder that the most important improvements in education often come not from policy changes or administrative reforms, but from individual acts of caring and dedication that accumulate over time to create lasting transformation. The quiet revolution that began in a small-town high school cafeteria continues to ripple outward, influencing how schools throughout the country think about nutrition, education, and their responsibility to care for the whole child. It stands as proof that ordinary people doing ordinary work can achieve extraordinary results when they refuse to accept that mediocrity is inevitable, when they believe that everyone deserves their best effort, and when they have the courage to act on their conviction that things can always be better. And late at night, when the halls of Willow Creek High School are empty and quiet, some say you can still catch the faint aroma of fresh bread and simmering soup, a reminder that love and dedication can transform the most humble places into something special, something that continues to nourish and inspire long after the original revolutionaries have moved on to other battles, other opportunities to make the world a little better. One meal